Thank you. And before we get started, we wanted to have Laura do a brief exercise with our group.
Thanks, Anna. And hey, everybody again. Good to be back with you. Welcome back from the break. Just want to extend the invitation that was shared earlier, which is to, feel free to move throughout the day. It's a really long time to be on Zoom. Feel free to stand up, sit down, kind of shake the body out. Feel free to like kick out, shake one leg a little bit, the other, just lifting the arms, anything that helps your body feel better being in front of a Zoom screen all day. So as I mentioned earlier, I want to introduce myself. My name is Laura. I'm a certified practitioner of psychoneuroenergetics, which is a somatic modality for renegotiating trauma in the body. And I'm really interested in different somatic approaches to help just regulate ourselves within the body. So I'm going to be leading a few little exercises throughout our time together. And as a starting point for this one, I'll just share a really brief overview on talking about the nervous system and some of why we're making time to go through these activities. So in a really simplified sense, our nervous systems, there's two main states that we can be in. We can be in a more activated state, which we sometimes call sympathetic, or in a less activated, more relaxed state within our nervous system called parasympathetic. And it's really important to note that there are positive and negative moods and experiences associated with both of these states, so being more or less activated. So it really depends on context. And importantly, we can learn how to help shift the state that we're in and kind of where our nervous system is depending on what we need in the moment. And there are a lot of different ways that we can learn to do this. And one of these is through breath and through breathing. And so right now, we're going to do a really quick exercise together called box breathing. And this is a really quick way to help slow down the breath, create more calmness and decrease stress in the body. And so right now, I'll just guide us through this and then we'll move into the session. So if everyone could just bring attention to the breathing. No need to change your breath right now. Just notice whatever your breath may be doing. And as you begin to notice your breathing, maybe breathe in a little bit more deeply.
That's fine. You don't have to call me back. I'm gonna go ahead and send like an email.
I think you are, there we go. And so breathing in through the nose, if that's accessible for you. And breathing out through the nose. And box breathing, it's a simple technique. Essentially, I'll explain it and we'll do it together, but we'll count to 4. We'll breathe in, counting to 4, hold the breath for 4, then breathe out over a count of 4, and then hold the exhale for 4. And this is something you can experiment with on your own in terms of how slowly you're counting. And also, if this doesn't feel good in your body right now, you can just ignore everything I'm saying. But for those who would like to participate, we'll try this out right now. So if you could, with me, on a count of 4, we'll start inhaling. 2, 3, 4. Hold the inhale at the top. 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4, and hold the exhale out. 2, 3, 4. We'll do it again. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold the breath at the top. 3, 4. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4. And breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold the breath at the top. 2, 3, 4. And breathe out. 2, 3, 4. Now with the breathing, come back to normal. letting the body take any little movements that might feel good right now, removing the shoulders back, shifting around in your chair if you're seated. And we'll come back and transition into the session. I'll pass it back to Anna. Thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you, Laura, for helping reground us as we enter into Module 2, Principles in Case Management. And this is part of our Foundations in Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court coordination. And we know that many of you are going to be online with us for the entirety of the session, but we are recording these sessions individually. And so we will be doing some re-announcements of some things you might have heard earlier. So bear with us. We're going to move to the next slide.
Again, just some fine print. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. And we can move on to the next introductory slide.
Thank you. I am very happy to have my colleague Kristina Pachecho here, and I'm going to let her introduce herself, and then Jacob and I will say a quick hello again for new or later listeners.
Hinyume Chris Pachecho, Koikama, Senahanu Sharshko Bijou for my Anishinaabe family. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. My name is Chris Pachecho. I am a Tribal Healing to Wellness Court Specialist with Tribal Law and Policy Institute. I act as an adjunct to the TYRC Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court team. By training, I'm a licensed drug and alcohol abuse counselor here in the state of New Mexico, where I am coming to you from my home in the Pueblo of Laguna. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for having me, Anna and Jacob.
Thank you. And if you're just joining this session, or if you're watching this at a later date, my name is Anna Clough, and I serve as co-director of the Tribal Youth Resource Center, and I will pass it to Jacob.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Jacob Metoxen. I'm a native from Wisconsin, and I provide training and technical assistance with the Tribal Youth Resource Center. Good to have you all here.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide. So we want to talk more specifically about case management. And so today we're going to be talking about some effective case management processes that you may want to implement in your Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court. We are going to talk about ways that you can support effective team communication and really trying to work collaboratively. And then we're going to look at some resources and some tools that may help you as you start to establish your case management process. And I think one of the things that we wanted to share here is one of the differences that we see in Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court is the fact that your team may be smaller than a typical broad treatment court that is serving adults. And so we know that many of you who are serving as a coordinator may be serving as that day-to-day case management specialist, or you may be a juvenile probation officer who's working in the treatment court. You're serving in the role as case manager, or you're the one that's working with the family. So we know that as you all begin to establish those roles and responsibilities for your team, just based on the natural size of the team, you may be in this role as the primary individual who is serving that case management role. So that's just something we wanted to share. Some of you may have differentiated roles in your court, or you have a bigger staff or team, and so those roles are going to look different. So this is general information, and you can apply it as it works the best for your community. So we'll go to the next slide.
So the basis for not only just our Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court work, but our Healing to Wellness Court work in general are our 10 key components. And with our 10 key components, we really emphasize community involvement, family relationships, and parent and caregiver involvement, culture and tradition. And we also acknowledge and really strongly recommend and advocate our tribal sovereignty in all of the work that we do, putting together our phases, putting together our eligibility requirements, And so if you ever want a copy of our 10 key components, please go to www.wellnesscourts.org and you can download yourself a copy. Or if you are an individual who still likes hard copies, just let us know and we can send you out a hard copy. Next slide. So these are the 10 key components as we've broken them down. And as you can tell, they're not in a linear manner, they're in a circle, because at any point we can, work on one of them or we can enter any of them. And when we are looking at case management, we are looking and working from more than a couple of these 10 key components. We're definitely working from the healing and treatment standpoint, but also the support and supervision. And I really like this version of the 10 key components because it talks about support and supervision, because really that's what we're doing. We're doing support and supervision in that key component. Next slide.
So we touched on this briefly in our overview, but for those of you who may have had an adult healing to wellness court in the past, or maybe you've worked in adult treatment programs, when we talk about the juvenile healing to wellness court, we're looking specifically at referring youth to services that are appropriate for their developmental needs. And so I think that's one of the major differences is in the overall approach. And as you all start to design your case management process and bring in those individual team members who are going to be part of the wellness court, I think one of the biggest things that we recommend is that these are individuals who know and understand how to work specifically with youth, or a willingness to learn, what is the best way to engage with the youth and their parents, or what are some of the things that we can do to motivate youth, and what do we see really working with a young population. And so not just trying to take the adult framework and place it and think that it's going to work for youth, but really trying to adapt it so that you're specifically responding to their needs. And when you look at the behavior, you're coming at it with a viewpoint that these are young people. And so the way we respond, the way we speak to youth, the way that we create our handbooks and our manuals and our things that we want to share with them, that all of those are done in a developmentally appropriate way. And I think for Wellness Court, we're always thinking, is this really what our community values? Is this what we want to be teaching our youth as part of this program? Because it really is an opportunity to create those connections, to build relationships, for them to be mentored by your team and as a coordinator. So really seeing yourself in that role as a mentor. And for us at OJJDP, we're always bringing in that aspect of positive youth development. So what are the existing youth services and youth activities that you have going on in your community, and how can you tie your youth participants into those existing programs? So not trying to build all of these different things on your own, but really relying on those existing services that are already in place for youth and developing those partnerships so that you can connect youth into those different programs. Pass it back to you, Chris. Next slide.
As we mentioned, case management is, flows through pretty much all of them, but specifically in these key components. So we talk about our referral points in our legal process, making sure that case management starts from day one and from upon entry into the juvenile healing to wellness court, doing that little guiding hand, not just telling a family or a juvenile, this is where you need to go, but actually maybe showing them and modeling that process of access and those services. Definitely screening and eligibility, because we are going to have to take a look at many areas of the juvenile and the family's life, and making sure that we're having the right fit, right person in the program, in our juvenile healing to wellness court program. definitely in treatment and rehabilitation. There are two forms of case management. We as drug and alcohol abuse counselors or counselors have our own version of case management in which we take our client and walk them through the treatment process or the recovery process. But they are also engaging in a case management through the supervision process. If you are utilizing a juvenile probation officer or a juvenile case manager for your juvenile healing to wellness court, intensive supervision really is one of the culminations of that case management, making sure that all of the services are being provided, that our juvenile participants are participating in those services, and incentives and sanctions, or actually responding to participants' behavior is where we get all of that information. And then we pass that on to our judge, because as a team, we want to make our judge look good when they're on the bench. We want to provide them with all of this case management information that we've gathered during this time, that our participants are participating in the services, that they are interacting with all of their service providers, or the activities that we have them, or that they are going through during juvenile healing to wellness court. We want to make sure that our judge knows that, so they can have quality and quantity interactions while they're on the bench and while they're checking in with that participant and family. And then also in monitor and evaluation, we want to know, are we doing what we said we were going to do? Do we have the right individuals in our program? Do we have the right services in our program? Is there something that maybe based on an individual going through our program that we need, or a new issue has arisen and we really need to maybe focus on this area? So case management really runs through all of these key components and through all of the activities and efforts of our Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court team. Next slide. So we often say that case management is the glue of our healing to wellness courts, whether they be juvenile, whether they be adult, or whether they be family. So it's maintaining those connections with our juvenile and the family and the agencies and programs that they're involved with, as well as the core team and the court. Supervision supports that individual and public safety through the monitoring of compliance, of curfews, drug tests, school attendance, and other requirements or sanctions imposed by the Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court. So again, case management is that thread, that glue that ties all of these things that we have as a Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court together. Next slide.
So when we talk specifically about Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court, for those of us who've worked in the juvenile court system and, maybe we've worked with the family or worked with the youth, I think one of the main differences that we see in Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court is this continuous relationship, not just the intermittent interaction with the family, like a 30-day check-in. So normally in a juvenile delinquency court where I served, you would have a youth come in, they'd received a citation or had been, been involved in the court previously. And, as a prosecutor, I might interact in a very limited form with the family. They came in, talked about what had happened. We made a recommendation. The judge maybe referred to some services, but there wasn't that collaboration. There wasn't a connection in the continued services to support the youth. That's in just a traditional juvenile justice process. In Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court, I think we're seeing that the meshing of the team. So all of those service partners that are coming together, working collaboratively to monitor the progress. And so all of you are staying on the same page about what is going on with this family, what's going on with the youth, really in that team-based approach, gathering together regularly, establishing those times where you're coming together to staff and share information with the team, having those established members with a specific role as part of the team. And this intensive supervision is this intensive translates into this intensive case management process. And really the supervision isn't to catch the youth doing something bad, but it's to monitor for the specific needs that are arising as part of the case management process. So this supervision that's increased is to intensify the level of response and the immediacy of the response of your team to the needs that are identified. And these go down to basic needs. So we're starting at the criteria of what are the basic needs of this youth? You know, does this youth house? Does he or she have food? You know, what's going on in the home? Moving to that outer level of treatment, other rehabilitative supports that can be helpful, and then those pro-social and youth development activities that can be tied into the wellness court case process. So we can go to the next slide. I think this is an image that kind of displays that, and we know in the adult wellness court that we do have this aspect of education and employment, but for youth, there's an additional level of engagement that you might be having with education providers, with teachers, with counselors or others who may be working at the school-based level. And so we see a lot of relationships being developed between juvenile healing to wellness court teams and the local school districts, because they can actually be a doorway to help get youth referred into the court. And they're with those youth day to day. They see some of the behavior issues that might be happening. If you have a school resource officer or someone else who is in tune with what's going on in the community, they can help refer youth to those services that are needed. We also see this integration of family. And so because we're working specifically with youth, we know that we're going to be working with the parent or the other caregivers who are involved in that youth's life. And so I think that's an additional level of engagement that happens in the juvenile healing to wellness court. Not that we don't see family engagement in adult wellness court, but it's a different relationship when you're working with young people. There's also this aspect of understanding, you know, what are those influences in the youth's life? So we're looking at their peers, their friendships, and other things that are going on in their social lives. And so working as a coordinator or as a case manager closely with whoever that is on your team that's providing supervision, and understanding, you know, what are the things that are going on in this youth's life that we might need to be aware of. When do we see certain behaviors happening? And Chris, I know, having served as a probation officer, you know how much those peer influences can affect progress in the court. So I'll let you share on these other aspects of wellness court case management.
Definitely. And it's in those peer and friendships, they can either be beneficial in a sense in that they can help and support that juvenile through this process. And it's always nice to engage that person, you know, and it could be also when you're talking about the family bonds, it may not be a blood relative, maybe a clan relative, a clan mother, a clan sister, a clan aunt, or a significant adult in their life. But those peer and friendships, you know, we can capitalize on them, and we can utilize them to help this individual as they're going through the process. Because what that also does is it lets that person's friends know that, hey, I'm wanting to make some changes in my life. Right now, I'm court involved. I'm having these issues going on. You know, I need your support. And, you know, the other thing too is great is this person is also getting similar information, and they may be having their own struggles. So it's a really nice kind of thing when we can include those peer and friendships, and also those significant adults in this process.
I know we made
Oh,
Oh,
sorry, Anna.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
gonna say, I know we may touch on this more later too, but one of the things that I think you brought up in the past during our trainings is level of treatment. Because youth are different than our adult populations, the levels and extent of treatment, and then even how that's tied into the overall wellness phases. And
Right.
so I think you've shared with me before, teams really taking the time to confer with that treatment provider. And even if the length of treatment, that time is ending, that youth may still be involved in wellness court and continuing to receive other services. So they may
Right.
not be involved in treatment the entire time they're in the wellness court process, but they may be involved with your team even through aftercare and other counseling services or things that you might have in place for them even after graduation. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that.
Exactly, Anna. And especially when we're looking at treatment and levels of intervention, making sure that we have appropriate treatment providers or at least treatment services for adolescents. I started my career at a school-based teen health center. So I started out with working with adolescents. One of the best jobs I ever had was learning, was a big learning process. And then I eventually moved into working with adults. But there's such a difference in adolescents and adults in that the types of services that we provide. When you are a treatment provider and you get a juvenile in a session, it may take 3 or 4 sessions to gain rapport with that individual. It may take a lot of time just sitting and coloring with an individual or playing a game just to build rapport with that juvenile. They may not readily come in ready to sit down and talk about what's going on in their life. So patience is a big thing, especially with working with juveniles. Also levels of intervention, as Anna mentioned, they might not need individual one-on-one counseling for the whole duration of juvenile healing to wellness court. Again, we're going back to our assessment and screening and assessment process to look at the level of need of service for that individual. They might not need individual counseling. They may be ready at a certain point to either transition into some group counseling or some other pro-social activities that would be beneficial to them. So again, listening to your treatment providers, listening to your assessments, taking really good information regarding their family life at that intake process really helps us in this whole process of their time in healing to wellness court. Next slide. So we have the program coordinator, and this person wears many hats. So they may be the Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court coordinator, Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court case management, or a version of both. But they wear many hats. Sometimes they're the project coordinator. They are, if you have a grant, they are the one who are in charge for the deliverables of that grant. They're big on planning and development. They develop a lot of the relationships for the wellness court services and activities, and then also the steering committee or advisory committee. They do a lot of that partnership development, calling people, or hey, do you have this service, or we need this, we have this juvenile healing to wellness court, can you sit on our advisory team and help support it? They also may guide decision making in case management, in the case management plan. This depending on whether or not you are also utilizing a juvenile probation officer, where they may have a case management plan for that person. And then also, if you have social services that are involved in these juvenile cases, they may have a case plan as well. So really, they can help guide some of that decision making based on what the requirements are of the Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court. They're a team player. with that multidisciplinary team. You know, all the staff and the partners, the court and social services, health education stakeholders, you know, they are that team player. When I do adult training, I really like to say they are the quarterback. They're the ones who kind of call out the plays. They're the ones who kind of say, okay, you go line for here's a running play. You take this and run with it. They really are the quarterback of that team. They help direct how services are coordinated for this juvenile. They also bring everybody in for a huddle when they need it, so they can start and talk, so they can talk about all of this information. And once again, we're giving that information to our judge. So they're also a connector to support that wellness court. They also do a lot of the future planning. You know, they, in their unproductive hours of 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm sure that coordinators are sitting there thinking about, okay, you know, there's this time, we have this, we've checked these boxes. Okay, well, what's next? What do we need next? Okay. So these individuals, aside from being multi-talented and multitaskers, they can also be a court administrator, a senior probation officer, or a juvenile probation officer, a case manager, or a clinician. They are someone who has all of these skills. They have some really good coordination skills, really good communication skills as well. Next slide.
Thank you, Chris. And kudos to the coordinators who are doing those 3 or 4 a.m. sessions. I know sometimes the job can be pretty stressful. It's a good way to use, you know, those awaking hours. This is just an example of case management role description. As Chris indicated, you know, it could be case manager, program coordinator, what have you. This is just going to give you an example of, you know, how to describe this person's role within the Juvenile Healing and Wellness Court. So case managers in the River City Juvenile Drug Court will have 2 roles. First, managing the information related to the youth's case among members of the drug court team. And second, coordinating the services with the youth and the family. So the case manager is responsible for collecting information from providers, the educational system, employers, family members, and others involved with the youth, and will be the person who ensures that all pertinent information is shared with all members of the team. As Chris indicated, the quarterback or the point guard, what have you. The case manager will prepare the staffing document for each participant for the weekly staffing meetings. And the case manager will meet with the youth and family at home, at school, and in community systems to coordinate services that will assist the youth in staying substance-free and developing a drug-free lifestyle. The case manager will assist the family with the development of family rules and expectations. So Chris, I don't know if you want to get more specific on some of the description here for the case manager.
As you can see, as Jacob pointed out, there's a lot going on. So it's not only just collecting of information from the providers, but how do we collect that information and what information is valuable to the team? And as you can tell, it's not only just information from treatment providers, but it's from the educational system. So we have to understand how our educational system gives out or shares information with us. But it could also be family members and any others that are involved in with the youth. So we're looking at this very vast system and network of individuals to gather information. Also, this case manager or coordinator has the duty of meeting with the youth and the family. So not only in their home situation, but at the school or any other community systems that this individual is working in. And so that those skills of how is it that, you know, you speak with a youth, how is it that you work with a family, you know, in that home situation. So also there's a little bit of, it looks like there's some educational work also going on, because we're looking at sustainability. We really would not like this individual back in the juvenile justice system. We kind of want a one and done situation. So part of that is working with the family on those family rules and expectations, not only just while they're in wellness court, but for the future. For the long haul, how is it that we continue this system for this juvenile to succeed? Not only just the juvenile, but the whole family as well. Because in tribal communities, that is where a lot of us all live. I have a very good example from a healing to wellness court in Arizona, where they would often meet with families, and then they would have a meal together. In some tribal communities, I can say this from my own tribal communities, that when you are having these really good conversations or advice conversations, it's often followed with a meal, because what you're doing is you're digesting that information with that food that you're taking in. So it's also understanding the cultural components of our communities. What works best? What is the best way of reaching our juveniles and our families? Next slide.
One of the things I was going to add to that is being kind of the voice of if this is being housed in a court, really serving as that voice, because we're transitioning from a typical adversarial approach into this interdisciplinary approach. So when you think about perceptions from the community or from families or from youth who may have been previously involved in the court, I think that a coordinator is really serving to be in that restorative position as an individual who is saying, we're really here to help. And we're trying to transition from this, kind of not helpful. I don't know, not that the courts are not helpful, but this approach where you really feel like you're walking in, you're having to fight your way through it, to a different approach where we're saying, no, our team is here to support you. We really want to address the specific needs that you have. What are the issues that you've been facing in your life, and being that mentor and advocate. So transitioning it from something where people see the court as unapproachable to really being someone that youth can outreach and connect with, and be transparent and build that trust over time, obviously, but having that relationship with you where you can be responsive to the needs that are arising as part of their involvement in the court. So as a case coordinator or case manager, you are probably going to be one of the first individuals to meet with that youth and their families. And so being a part of that intake or orientation process. And I know in our first module, we have some questions about intake tools and assessment tools. And so we shared some things in the chat. And if there's follow-up questions about how to do an intake or how to conduct an assessment, we can do some follow-up with you individually about that process. As a coordinator, you can help and accompany that youth to their meetings with other service providers. So if they need to make an appointment with the counselor, or if they need to do some follow through with somebody who's going to be providing an assessment for substance use, you can actually be the individual that's helping them make that appointment, transitioning them into those services with that provider. We've had many coordinators and supervision staff talk about, these responsibilities go beyond normal business hours. So it is taking on that role of really, we're seeing each other as relatives. What are the needs? And those don't always fall in normal court hours. So not always going to be 8 to 5. It may be some after hours things, especially with youth. And we'll talk about this, at different points, but if you're planning your court dockets, are you planning those around youth schedules, around school? How are you trying to meet the needs specifically of this age and population? And then starting with a strengths-based atmosphere. And so showing that you care, offering hope, because for a lot of these youth, when we think about some of these broader issues that are happening happening among our tribal young people, but suicidal ideation, other things going on, mental health issues, you know, trying to offer hope and be the person that can intervene in this youth's life, because some of these youth are turning to substances because of things that are going on in their lives. And how can we be there to support them individually and be responsive to these needs that really can put them on a different path and save their life. So really wanting to stress the importance of this role in the community. All right, next slide.
So as Anna has given us, and we've given you examples of really what a case manager or a coordinator does, there is also that fine line that we often kind of walk between enmeshment or enablement. Are we enabling our families or our juveniles by doing a lot of these things for them? Are we enabling them when we send them to the treatment provider, and instead of just saying, okay, well, go to your behavioral health, you have an appointment set up, and just show up? Are we enabling them when we actually take them and say, you know what, you look kind of afraid to go there. Let me help you. Let me take you, and let me introduce you to that person, because it'll maybe make things a little bit easier. Okay. I'd say that's modeling good behavior, because we're not going to do that every time, but we're going to maybe do it once or twice. So until they get comfortable with it. So we're modeling behavior. And then also enmeshment. Are we, becoming too much part of this family and kind of trying to direct the best way for them to get through this process? So it's a very fine line, especially in tribal communities where people, where you may have relatives who are part of this program. So it really is a fine line. So, I kind of, would recommend, creating these boundaries, and then also creating timelines. If you see a family that is struggling, with some of this stuff, it's okay to help them out, but for a brief period of time, or have them model or have them display the behavior that you've been working with them. So boundaries and timelines are always really good in helping us get through whether or not we're becoming too enmeshed with our clients and their families, or we're enabling them too much.
Chris, I have a
Anna?
question.
Sure, Jacob.
So in terms of the coordinator, it seems like there's going to be a lot of persistence as well as positivity. Can you expand on that mentality, especially when maybe the youth that you've been working with for a few months has a hiccup in their phases, and you need to keep them on track, and you might be the
Right.
only adult role model in their life, or one of the few adult role models in their life.
Right.
Talk about the importance of that mentality and getting them through the next phase and hopefully graduating.
Right. That's a really good question, and a good situation, Jacob, because we will have those individuals. Our goal and our hope is that they go through all of these phases flawlessly without any sanctions. But that's in an ideal world. We will have those individuals. We will have those juveniles who might return to their drug use and behavior, or they might return to some of the behavior that got them into wellness court. And how we handle that, one is not to take it personally, is that they did not do this to us as a case manager or as a coordinator, as a team. They are human. We're all human. And once again, they're juveniles. They are learning how to become adults. They're learning how to learn from their mistakes. So the best thing we can do is, one, not to push them away. As much as they would want us to push them away, it's really important that we either pull them closer and let them know that we do know what they're doing. We might want to programmatic changes. We might want to increase their supervision time. or we might want to increase the amount of time they come in and see the judge. Or we might want to do a curfew. We might want to engage some of their peers, their friends, their significant adults, positive significant adults in their lives to help with that guidance. So that is not solely on us as a case manager or as a coordinator. Really look at your resources. You know, I know the instinct is to kind of, you know, want to take it all on yourself, but you have a team, and you have a team of support people for this juvenile. So it shouldn't always fall on you. So going back to your team. Did that answer your question, Jacob?
Yes, ma'am.
I was gonna jump in, Chris, and I like the word you said, the boundaries. I think that's a good conversation for your team in when we get into some of our strategic planning with our tribal grantees. We talk about, you know, why do we want policies and procedures? Why do we want a handbook in place before we start services? You know, these are to create boundaries not only for your team and the expectations for each other, but for the families and the youth as well. Like, here's the expectations you have of us. And I think, you know, all of us try to go above and beyond, but when you talk about this, a good strengths-based relationship where people are not overstepping those boundaries regularly and having clear expectations at the forefront, not only for ourselves, but for our teammates. And then, so those youth understand, you know, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do. Here's the limits, here's who needs to be involved in these conversations. Here's, you know, you have this expectation that you can be honest with me and transparent, but we've had some really great discussions about, you know, these youth may be encountering things at home that are not safe, and, you know, different situations that may be going on in the family or extended family. And we know that as a coordinator, our role is ultimately to provide a safe environment for these youth. And so when we know there's things that are going on that need to be reported further, we had a great discussion with our colleagues at TLPI about, you know, that child welfare aspect of a juvenile healing to wellness court, and where's the line, you know, where's the line where we need to move into some crisis protocols or safety protocols. And it's, you know, we recognize there might be some issues there that are beyond anybody's control at this point, and so we need to make some more in-depth referrals. And so we know that some of you might be placed in that situation at some point and you're having to make really difficult decisions, but having a team there to support you, and where you've all said, you know, these are our values, these are our policies, we're going to stick to them, and we know that a youth is in an unsafe situation, you know, we're making these agreements that we're going to follow local tribal protocols or policies related to youth and family welfare. So I think those are some discussions that are important to have at the forefront as well.
And Anna, you bring up a really good point. And I know you and I have had a conversation about this, and this is something that I've also begun adding into my trainings with adult teams. But for those of you who are either developing your team right now or your policies and procedures, but really think about a crisis plan. When you know, what is that crisis plan? You know, it's better to have that in place right now. Like, what do you do if a juvenile is in with the case manager and it, you know, makes this statement of, I feel like hurting myself? You know, what is the process for that? What are the steps that you take to help not only make sure that that youth is in a safe place, but then also that you as a coordinator, as a case manager, has some backup, has some support. You know, as you know, like I mentioned before, I'm a licensed drug and alcohol abuse counselor here in the state of New Mexico. So I have these ethics and these ways that I know how to handle that according to my licensure requirements. But when you're talking about someone who you know, might have been formerly a court administrator, there needs to be a process. So start thinking about that. How is it that you are going to handle these crisis situations within the juvenile system? It's better to have this plan going in and all of those sources identified before that 2 o'clock in the morning crisis call, when you're scrambling and you're trying to figure out, okay, who do I call? And you're trying to find a placement for this juvenile. And, you know, believe me, I have been there. I've been there in my former job, and it's not fun. So it's always better to have a plan in system or in place before these things happen. Next slide. So the other core aspects of our supervision we talk about is what processes will be in place to increase individual and community safety. Remember, we are taking our juveniles out of an adversarial court system where detention might have been a possibility, and putting them back in the public with their family, with the community, in order to get the help and services that they need. But we also still have to ensure individual and community safety. So what are the processes that are in place? You know, are we having a curfew? Are we having weekly check-ins with the probation officer? Are we having, no contact orders if those are possible? Are we utilizing electronic monitoring to limit that individual's boundaries within the community? Are you all going to do unannounced home and school visits to make sure that that individual is where they're supposed to be during the school days and during the off hours? Also, what will your drug testing protocols be? So these are all very important things that we look at in our aspects of supervision. Is how is it we're going to do this, and who's going to do it? Does it incorporate many roles, or is it one person, one or two people? And in order for that individual not to, have 10 different people to go to during supervision, but are we going to utilize a JPO? Is this a coordinator position, or is this a case manager job as well? So there's a lot to think about when we do supervision. And our big thing that we should think about is individual and community safety. Next slide.
So an aspect of wellness court when we're looking at treatment and substance use is this drug testing aspect. And so understanding that it is a part of the case management process, but creating an environment of respect and trust, and I think accountability really in the wellness court. So considering how you're going to implement your drug testing protocols, and also how you're engaging with youth and looking at best practices in conducting juvenile drug testing. And so there are some recommendations on how drug testing should be conducted, making sure that you're setting it up so that you're not, and we're going to have a session on trauma-informed approach, but we're not trying to create an environment where we're traumatizing youth or we're shaming youth. And so really it's just an accountability piece. So transparency for that youth and creating the capability for your team to know, are we making progress? And so we're implementing treatment, we're referring you to these services. Is there progress being made with the substance use? And are we creating an environment where youth feel comfortable sharing? You may not need to drug test. A youth may be honest with you and say, I had a setback this week. I ended up using well, there's not really a need for a test at that point if they're being honest with you, letting you know that there's some things going on with them at that point in time. But regular randomized drug testing is the general recommendation, understanding that there's going to be setbacks during those probably first 1 or 2 phases, and with the hope that you are setting this youth on a new trajectory and that they are going to be reducing or not using substances in the future. So, Chris, I don't know if you have additional comments on the drug testing piece. I know we get lots of questions about
Right.
types of drug testing, so we can talk about that in just a bit too.
I really like what you mentioned earlier, Anna, in that, the goal is not to shame or not to catch our youth. But if that youth is honest with you, it's to create this atmosphere of, it's okay to be honest. And so one of the things that, and we want you to be honest. And so one of the things that we do is like you said, if a youth is honest and they say, you know what, I used this weekend, there is no need for you to confirm that because they've been honest with you. And so you take that and you say, okay, well, let's move on. What do you need? Let's talk to your treatment provider. Do you need additional counseling? Do you need maybe a group? What is it that what support can we give you? So we're responding to that individual's behavior, and it is going to be a little bit different than our adult healing to wellness court situations. So one of the things that we can also do is making sure that, again, these are individuals who are using. And so in that first few phases, you're going to get a lot of individuals who are going to return to their drug use behavior. That's just the nature of addiction, and just the nature of individuals taking drugs is they want to continue it. And so they may not be completely honest in the beginning. But we also have to understand that, there is some support that they need. Maybe in the first beginning phases, you are doing more drug testing. If someone says, hey, I just refuse to quit or refuse to stop taking drugs, you need to really reconsider a level of care for that individual. Maybe they need a higher level of care before they come into a juvenile healing to wellness court situation. But yes, drug testing, especially with the juvenile healing to wellness courts, there's just always, it just always brings so many questions and so many situations. It's also one of those things that really we need to take a look at and be very solid on before we start working on, before we start our wellness court, or take a step back and look at and how we're doing our drug testing, because it can cause some issues further down the line.
Chris, we get questions just about types of testing. I know we've had some coordinators share that they test, using an oral swab. Others, do urine testing. We know there's hair testing.
Right.
Other things that you're seeing as far as testing, I know that we had a question about skin patch in the spring. So I don't know if there's recommendations that you're seeing in different approaches and how testing is conducted.
With some of the adult wellness courts that I've worked with, especially during COVID, the patch tests were more popular because they could come in, to an isolated situation and put the test on and then come back later. The mouth swabs also became more popular during COVID. So I've seen individuals who are continuing that practice, but they're continuing that practice for those individuals who are doing well. So it's kind of almost an incentive. If you are doing well, then your tests have been coming up negative. we'll continue this process. But the minute they start going, in the positive direction, or you start to show positive for certain drugs of use, then we have to go back to the original, which is a urine drug test. Now with juveniles, I haven't heard very much from the juvenile wellness courts in how they're conducted. I know with the juveniles, it's a little bit more, we need to be a little bit more cautious, especially around the urine drug tests, because, one, in the adult situation, we advocate for observed drug tests. Now that can be very difficult in a juvenile situation. So once again, I'm open. I'm open for any suggestions that anybody has in however you are doing drug testing in your juvenile population. I'm all ears, because it just seems to be a little bit more touchy in the juvenile situation. Jacob, did you have something to share?
Yes, ma'am. We've got a question from Miss Buckmeyer up in Alaska. She says her wellness court uses oral swabs. If we have a participant who is admitting to current use, should we be trying to utilize a different type of test that can measure levels? THC specifically stays in the system a while, but not when using. The number should be dropping. That cannot be measured with an oral swab. Curious of what other thoughts are. Any suggestions, Chris?
So this comes from the adult situation. And in the adult situation, a positive test is a positive test is a positive test. We're not working on levels. We don't, track those levels. If someone continues to be positive, then it's a positive test. I, by my training, am not a person who, works with those levels, understands or how to calculate those levels. That's not my forte. And I also, I don't know if there are very many coordinators out there who have that specific training. But for me, a positive test is a positive test is a positive test. Okay. I know that's also a point of discussion, is the levels. I just don't have the expertise to do that. And I don't know, I know that there are subject matter experts who do. So, if you don't, I want to stay in my lane, and that's not my lane. So, that's always a hard one with the levels.
I've seen one of the grantees I work with actually uses that approach. I think the hair follicle test, which will tell, or even the more specific urinary test will tell exactly what the levels are and the substances testing positive for, and kind of take that approach. Well, if the numbers are going down, and these substances will stay in their system for a while, then there's an indication that there hasn't been additional usage.
I think that's one of the, when we talk about or having these conversations in these large groups, inviting you all to converse, because one thing is that these are your courts, so you get to decide, what is our approach, what do we want to measure as progress. I think in our adult court system, one of the issues when an adult is coming into a drug treatment court is, yes, there's that aspect of rehabilitation, but on the drug court side, Chris, you might agree, there may be some really serious crimes that may have been occurring before they came into drug court. So there really is that, like, we want to see progress. A positive drug test could send them on, back into adult jail, prison, whatever it is that's going to be happening. On the juvenile court side, there may be an argument for measuring these levels, because you see a slight reduction, and that can indicate progress. You can really, support that youth, and hey, we are seeing reduction in levels, encouraging, continued reduction of use. The goal is rehabilitation. I think juvenile court, we come into that, the goal of in our juvenile court is to divert youth. We want to provide rehabilitative environments. And so, there may be an argument for doing this at levels, measuring levels. But I think, you know, you have to have the testing in place to be able to do that. I think you could come together as a team and talk about, you know, consensus on, you know, what are we rewarding, and then what are we saying, you know, there's going to be a consequence because we are continuing to see this use. Because I think there's a balance of accountability. You know, we've got this accountability piece, you know, they're involved in the justice system. We want youth to be well, we want to place them on a path to recovery, but we also have this accountability piece of our courts, and that really is to say we're trying to motivate you into your own behavior change, but at the same time, as a community, you know, we don't find this behavior to be acceptable in our communities. How do we balance both of those pieces? So we want to address the substance use. We want people to be rehabilitated. We also want our community safe. We want these individuals safe, and we want to see this reduction in the use of harmful substances and the other things that are happening in their lives because of this use. So I think that's a great dialogue there. I don't think that there's like firm, you know, this is the 100% right answer to this question. But I think we come to our best consensus as community members, and we say what our values are, and we say, you know, we don't want our youth engaging in these behaviors, and here's why, because we see the harmful activity that happens on the other side of that. And so here's our goal, and that's what you really are coming together as a team. You're deciding that, like, here's our goal. Here's what we want to see. We do want to see a reduction in substance use, and here's how we're going to do it. And here's how we're going to encourage our youth while they're in wellness court in doing that. So the methodology really is up to you on how you're testing, what you're measuring, but knowing there's resources out here to help you decide, you know, what's the best method for that. So
and I totally agree with you, Anna. There is not a one size fits all answer for this. It is really how that court and how that program decides to utilize and implement their drug testing protocol. And you're also right in that, you know, it could be that positive reinforcement. Look, your levels are coming down. That's great. You must be doing really well. These are conversations that the judge can have, the coordinator can have, the team can have with that participant. Also, you know, there may be jurisdictions or juvenile wellness courts that have the resources to send those drug tests out to have those levels monitored. And I noticed a comment in the chat from Dave MacArthur, you know, noted that that there's a situation where they send their tests out and the levels kind of come back and they can monitor that. You know, that's all great, but I completely agree with you. This is one of those $50 million questions that we get in not only just juvenile healing to wellness courts and adult healing to wellness courts, and there is no one right answer. It really is, you know, going back to the 10 key components, the exercising of your tribal sovereignty. This is how your program is going to do it. We can offer some guidance, but really it's up to you all.
I think we could talk all day on that and invite everyone else to engage, but we'll go to the next slide.
When we are looking at case management, there are tons of models out there of how to do case management. And so these are 3 top models that we've looked at, and they come from, and I can never remember this acronym, but it is a resource that we utilize, and it's called Starting a Juvenile Drug Treatment Court. And 3 of the models that they use are, one is an independent, where each system, treatment, mental health, and the court has its own case manager, and that reports to the operational team. So the behavioral health, the drug and alcohol program, they have their own case manager. They collect all of their information from the clinician about that participant. The court has its own case manager, which might be kind of the the central point of contact for all of the other agencies. And then also maybe juvenile probation has its own case manager. And so, but they all converge. They all do their own little part in gathering information regarding that client, but then they give all of that information to a central point of contact. Some of the pros is that everybody's involved. You know, they're utilizing a system that is comfortable to them, that makes sense to them. And then also the work is divided. They might be working on something completely different in treatment versus what probation is working on, or maybe the court is working on, but they all still come together. Some of the cons are that services are not always coordinated. Like, you know, I might not always know what juvenile probation is working on specifically with that client, or I might be going down another path. So, but if we spoke together, we probably could come to the same conclusion. We probably would have a very nice, sometimes there might be services overlap where juvenile probation is saying, okay, you have to do this, or this is something we're recommending, but then also treatment is saying, we want you to do this. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Also, sometimes youth and family feel overwhelmed. There's just so many things to do, so many programs or things, you know, services to utilize. Okay. Now, a coordinated model of case manager is that there's one point of contact. There's a person, there's a single person who communicates among all of the various systems. This is generally what we are advocating in Healing to Wellness courts, these last two. So the team receives all progress reports. The case coordinator, you know, looks at if there's any gaps or overlaps, and, you know, says, okay, you know, well, treatment has them doing this and probation has them doing this. You know, let's come to a happy medium and see if we can find a service that works for them. It requires that dedicated case manager, that one person, that point of contact who links everybody together and also links the family in. And then we have a collaborative where each system designates a case manager and they work together as a team, pulling that information about the youth. So there's strong advocacy for the youth and the families. One complete progress report. So there's one report, and it's everybody's all on the same page. You know, it could be that, it could be that probation and treatment are talking and they're saying, yeah, you know what, I was thinking that same thing for this family. Well, let's join forces and let's offer them this. Or, you know, there's this program that would work way much better. So it's like you have these two case plans that are being met, but there's only one service for that individual. They're not being inundated. This requires a lot of time and a lot of cooperation from all of the systems and all of those case managers. So really, if you look at it, there's a lot of investment. There's a central point of contact. And our goal is to make sure that our families are not being overwhelmed and that all of our systems are talking with one another. And when we all talk together, or when we all talk with one another, we can then provide some valuable information, not only to the team, but then to the judge. So the judge can have that meaningful conversation with our families at the time of a check-in. Anna, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, when we were preparing for this part of the conversation, Chris and I were talking about part of these can be a little bit, just a little bit confusing. I think if you're coming into this and you haven't previously worked in case management, or maybe you've been in one specific area, but we were talking about the independent system approach, which we were saying none of these are completely wrong. It's just that there may be some that cause additional issues for that youth and family. So I think in that first column, you see, you know, the cons of an independent system are that the services may not be coordinated. So it's great just to have something in place that's trying to refer youth and get them connected to what they need. But when you move into this coordinated or collaborative approach, you're creating a system where youth aren't duplicating things that they've already done. And so an example that I shared was a court that I worked with a couple of years ago. We're trying to work with their county to refer youth into the court system. And so the probation officer at the tribe was going to be working on an intake process, and they are going to be taking with the county that initial risk assessment and things that the county were doing and just building questions on. So instead of that youth having to sit through 2 full intake processes, they were just going to be asking some additional questions that weren't already found in the initial assessment. And so that way that youth is not having to sit through another interview where they're getting asked the same exact questions that they've been asked by a probation officer within that month or so. And then the new case coordinator isn't having to feel like they're, putting this youth in the position where they're re-answering things they've already answered. So just building on things that are already being conducted. I think another example of that, reducing confusion for the youth by being collaborative, because over the weekend when we were preparing for the training, I was looking at a treatment provider's sample case plan, and there were some recommendations. So if you do this, this is a reward, and if you do this, this is the consequence, and they had it all listed out, and it was in a behavior agreement. But if your court has a grid for your responses and your consequences and your incentives, making sure that those things are in agreement. And so your youth, if they're working with a treatment provider and that treatment provider isn't on board with your court's policies and procedures, and these are the incentives we want to give if we see progress being made, but you have a completely different plan happening with a different provider, I think that can cause confusion for those youth and there's the family and expectations of what's actually happening. So I think that's why it's helpful to have a coordinated process in place, because I think that could very easily happen where one person's telling, well, this is going to happen if you do this, and then another person's telling them, well, this is actually what happens whenever we see participants doing this particular thing. So I think that's why it's important to have clear policies in place, and then having everyone in agreement. This is our general response for this behavior, or levels of response for different behaviors. So I'm just clarifying that, and I'm saying both positive and negative behaviors, so it's important to maintain some expectations there. All right, I think we can go to the next slide. We had some chat questions for you all. I think we're a little bit over, so we'll try to hurry through these. So after considering the different models, and Chris, I'll let you share if you need to, we had independent, collaborative, and coordinated. Do you have an idea of how you'll engage as a team? So feel free to share in the chat, or if you already have a court, what approach do you all utilize? Feel free to share that in the chat.
In my Healing to Wellness Court experience, which is getting a little dated right now, but we strive for that collaborative approach, but more times than anything, we use this coordinated approach. And it was just easier for us because we had a central Healing to Wellness Court coordinator where we funneled a lot of our information to. And that's just kind of how our system was built, and it worked really well. And then we also had really good staffing time in which we got together on a weekly basis so we could make sure that all of this information was being shared.
You all can continue to answer in the chat. We have a second question. You can go for it, Antonia. All right, so we're going to move into a discussion about case staffing, and I know we're a little bit over the hour, so if you can stick with us, stay with us. If not, we know if you have to step away, feel free, and you can watch the rest of the session later. But what do you think is shared at case staffing? So that's the question. And feel free to share that in the chat.
As a clinician, I would share information that that let the team know if this individual was making some behavioral or attitudinal changes, their attitude not only towards counseling, but being in the juvenile healing to wellness court process, whereas, you know, in the beginning they were really hard to engage, but now they come in, their journaling entries. I know a lot of clinicians who use journaling with adolescents, and they really like it. Giving them, you know, starter questions is really, really helpful. If the adolescent is letting me know that their grades are improving, just how they look when they come in is always one of the things I would want to share. You know, whereas you had an individual who, you know, wasn't always open, you know, maybe kept their head down, but now they're smiling, they're chatting, they're having a conversation with you. Those are some things I would share.
We had some good answers in the chat. Anything pertaining to progress or setbacks regarding the participant, and anything that would be beneficial to support the minor. So good answers. All right, we can go to the next slide. We'll move into a conversation about staffing. Right, so no matter the approach that you all are utilizing, it's really important to have a staffing process so that you can share updates about the youth and their progress, any concerns that you all have as a team. You will be making recommendations. So if you are housed in your court system and you have an expectation that they're going to appear before the judge or before whoever that is that's leading this final decision making. I know we have some courts that are involving some elders panels and other things in their court. So you're going to be making recommendations to whoever that decision maker is. And then you're also making resolutions to address issues or other problems that seem to be reoccurring. So all the answers that you all shared are correct. So, you know, information that's helpful to make decisions about the next steps in the case management process. And we can go to the next slide.
Just some more examples of what kind of information is shared as part of the staffing. You know, assessment in the beginning, we want to share these assessment results, making sure that all are aware of maybe the treatment plan or the case plan that's going on. Attendance at scheduled appointments, you know, not only just for treatment, but you know, other services, drug and alcohol test results, and we could talk a lot about that. Attainment of goals, because this is very behavioral. We want to look at those behavioral milestones. Are they reaching those behavioral milestones? And when they are, we want to make sure that we're able to provide incentive or, you know, clap for them, you know, make sure that we want to keep this behavior going. And as I say, you know, attainment of juvenile healing to wellness court phase requirements, you know, checking all those boxes. Did they do that? Great. If they're compliant with home visits or check-ins or curfews, and definitely attendance in school improvement. So it's very important for us to have those attendance, or excuse me, those educational liaisons from our schools on our teams, so they can help us with this. So they can give us those updates, you know, and any kind of commission of new offenses or any kind of challenging or intimidating behavior towards staff or family. Once again, remember, this is that public and private, public and individual safety kind of thing. So we want to know these things. Next slide.
And yep, that's
sorry,
just
Anna.
oh no, I was just say that's a general list. There's a lot of other things that you all could add, but we just wanted to share some things that we know happen in the staffing process.
So why is it essential that we get case management right? Because we don't want to set our individuals up for failure. As you know, we don't want to overwhelm them with too much. We don't want to send them to the wrong type of service. We just want to make sure that they have a good path, that they are able to follow this path. Also, any kind of collaborative case management, it gives us a broader picture of the participant's life rather than this small focus. So if you look at all the different areas that we're looking at education, we're looking at treatment, we're looking at a juvenile probation view, and we're looking at a community view. So what are all of these views of this individual, and how can we bring that together? It also supports this retention within this program, that we're not overwhelming our individuals, but that we are having that just right service so they feel they can do it. It's not overwhelming, but it's just right. We're like, okay, I'm not being asked to I asked to do a lot, but it doesn't feel like it's too much. Or I'm getting the support I need to work through it and to get through these services. And every service that I go to, I feel good. I feel welcomed. I feel like I'm being supported. So it's really, this is why we do good case management. Anna, do you have anything to add?
No, just thank you for sharing today. I think the rest of the slides are actually examples of case management staffing sheets. And Jacob, I think you were going to screen share. As part of the training, we have several supplemental resources that we're going to be sending out afterward, and several of the example case staffing sheets will be included in that packet. So Jacob, if you want to bring those up, I'll talk through. We can go to our
I think
next slide.
Antonia's got to open up my screen share.
Okay.
Got it.
I'll read through while you bring your screen up. So in this packet, we have a sample case staffing sheet, and then in the materials, would strongly urge you all to check out the wellnesscourts.org publication section. And in the publications, you'll see a resource that is called Case Management. And in that, in the appendix, I believe, Chris, there's several examples of case staffing sheets. And so I think that these sheets help you to be clear with each other. It helps standardize your communication before court or before you plan to meet with the youth and their families. So when they're coming to do that regular check-in, you've shared information with each other about progress and goals. You should be planning to meet regularly. I know that a lot of courts will try to meet weekly or bi-weekly, depending on how often those youth are coming into the court or into the program to meet and discuss their progress. And I think it's important for you all, you may have some internal case management forms and things that you share with each other, and then you may have things that you use to communicate with the youth. So you may have, progress update for parents, or you may have sheets that you directly share with the youth or participant, but you should be developing those so that they're specific for the audience that's engaging and using that material. And I know that we had some questions about release of information and consents, and so just as a reminder, we'll be sending out some examples of those. But I think, Jacob, you're scrolling, we can see, some space for them to share their own goals, space for you all to talk about, what's been met, what activities were conducted over that time period, what providers did they meet with, and did they make it to their appointments, did they not, what were some issues that maybe came up over the period of time between reports. So hopefully you all can take a look at those. Those are just samples, so feel free to add to those or use those in a way that works best for your community. And check out that Wellness Courts publication, Case Management. I want to thank Chris for taking time to be a part of our training today. She serves as part of the BJA team, and invite you to meet her in person at our wellness enhancement training. So Chris, thank you so much for being here today. I think we're going to be closing out module 2. And I did want to say we do have an evaluation for each module. So if you have time and you're listening in, please fill out the evaluation. We want to make sure that we're responding to your needs as tribal grantees and others who are joining this session today. And there's additional resources at the end of this module, and then we'll be sending out another packet after the training that has additional resources in it. So with that, that's the conclusion of module 2. And thank you again to Chris for sharing her knowledge today.
Just one last thing, don't forget to go to wellnesscourts.org to the enhancement training site and take a look at our upcoming enhancement training. Hope to see you all. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Jacob.